Welcome to the Business of Family, the podcast where we explore the stories, challenges, and opportunities of family businesses. I'm your host, Tammy Buss, and I'm a family business survivor, and I'm also a family business advisor. In this show, we'll be talking with family business leaders and experts to bring you insights and inspiration so you too can survive your family business journey. Whether you're a founder, a successor, a professional, or just curious about family business, this podcast is for you. Today, our guests are Angela Tipton and Travis Franklin. They're co-founders of Tipton Franklin Marketing Strategies. Cousins, Angela and Travis, redefine the possible for AgTech and Biotech businesses. Angela's career path is a testament to her versatility and passion for science and strategy. With a foundation and expertise rooted deeply in biotech, Angela worked in various roles in R&D, molecular and microbiology, and lab management with Fortune 500 companies. Recognizing her unique blend of scientific knowledge and strategic thinking, Angela made a pivotal shift into marketing after receiving her MBA. So I actually want to hear much more about that. And Travis grew up on a third generation farm and ranch where he learned the value of hard work and planning ahead. This agricultural background shaped his approach to business, grounded, determined, and always forward thinking, with a career spanning diverse industries such as finance, startups, IT services, nonprofit, healthcare, and basically everything in between. Travis brings a wealth of knowledge and a fresh perspective to every project. Welcome.
Thanks for having us, Tammy. Great to be here.
Wow, that's a lot. I'm. There's so many things here I need to talk about, but the first thing I want to talk about is not only are you co-founders, but you're cousins. So tell me about that.
Yeah, so I'll start, and I'm sure Travis has some different insight than beyond what I can share. But it really started with a conversation, and years ago when I was in my career and I was focused on science roles, I was really curious about marketing, and I talked to Travis on a few occasions about his experiences and what he was doing with marketing, and this was really before I had made that pivot into marketing. And I just found a lot of knowledge and inspiration from some of the work that he was doing. And that really helped further my drive and interest in pivoting into marketing. And years later, we realized that we were doing a lot of the same kind of thing and had, at least in my perspective, a lot more interests in marketing strategy than I even realized. And one day, actually, I think this is a conversation we had over a few days. We were talking about getting into business together, and we thought, that'd be really cool that we've been cousins and known each other all of my life anyways, and it'd be really cool to get into business together and see what we could do. We saw that there was a lot of overlap in the work that we were doing, and we could pull different experiences from our backgrounds to really do something in the space that we wanted to. So that's really what drove us to get into business. But yeah, Travis, what do you think?
Yeah, pretty much what Ange said. We've worked together, or known each other for so long, and just as our careers followed along, they started to blend together. It made a lot of sense. I was, in fact, a few years back, I was at an agency, and we looked at, tried to bring Ange on then, so it would be kind of a more, one more boost there to the team. And that didn't timing wise work out. So when I left and moved on to a different path, it felt like just a really cool opportunity to match up. And Ange has a lot of balance to some of the things that I'm not great at, right? And so I'm like, Ange is really good at the public speaking side and the content creation, the editing, and the speaking pieces. And I like kind of the nerdier, the tech side of it, the behind the scenes, where I'm not as forward facing, and so we team really well together on that.
Well, that's good. A lot of in family businesses, because this will be a first generation family business, but with two generations, which is kind of interesting, or two families, two distinct family lineage. But one of the things that I think is really sort of fascinating is that a lot of family businesses think, oh, their kids are involved in something else. They're not going to be very interested in, my new business. And here I'm looking at you, Angela, and you've gone from, bio, molecular science, microbiology, all this sort of interesting lab work. And Travis, you from this huge diverse background of farming to IT to nonprofit, I mean, everything. And then you come together to form a marketing firm. I think that's just fascinating. Tell me a little bit about how you went from those sort of streams to being in opening a marketing firm. So A, it's fascinating that your cousins, you decide to work together, but B, from your diverse backgrounds into marketing.
Yeah, I think that, and I'll start with where my background began. I think it's easier to explain that journey and how I got into marketing to begin with, because that's really one of the core elements of why we started the business and why we're doing what we're doing. But my career journey started in the sciences. So I was always really passionate about science. I wanted to work in a lab, and that's the career path I had set forward for myself. In fact, after I got my bachelor's degree, I was actually very determined to get either a master's in science or a PhD. That is a track that I thought I was going to stay on. But when I got into my career, there were a few things that I learned about the industry and about myself that really made me want to make a change. And one of those things is that what I learned about myself was that I love science and the difference it makes in the world. I truly believe it is making a difference. But I realized that I had this ability or this passion to really help serve science in a different way that I hadn't originally realized until I got into business. And one of those was with communications and with marketing. I saw a lot of scientists that I worked with that really struggled to communicate what they were doing. They knew the value of the work that they were doing, but they really struggled to communicate that value to others. And science, it can be very complicated. It's very technical. There's a lot going on. So explaining it in a way that everyone can understand and relate to can be a significant challenge. And scientists are very proud, and as they should be, of the work that they're doing. And they don't want to take shortcuts. They don't want to just say the shortened version of what they're doing, because there is so much value. And it's hard to do that and still get the whole point across. So a lot of scientists that I worked with really struggled to communicate. So I saw actually a really big need in that space to really find a bridge between that science and that communication. And I saw, having worked in the industry, I saw controversies that came out of things like Monsanto. There was a big talk about GMOs and a lot of controversy around that. And really what a lot of that was the controversy was led by a failure to communicate properly. The scientists weren't able to communicate what they were doing, and so consumers were skeptical of what was going on, understandably so. But if there'd just been a more open and honest conversation about those things earlier on, I don't think it would have gotten to the level that it would have gone to. And there are many examples like that. That is not the only one. That is one that I was close to at the time, just based on the timing that I was in the industry. But that is what really drove my passion for business, is that I love science and the value that it provides to the world is immense. But if you can't communicate that appropriately, if you don't know how to share what you're doing, then all of the great work that you're doing can really get lost in the mix. It gets lost in the controversy, and you're not able to have the impact that you meant to have. And scientists, I have found, are very passionate about their work, and they are doing great things. And I love to elevate that. That's what gets me excited.
That sounds like the exact same problems that most families in business have. It's that communication, it's that sharing, it's making sure that you get what you're trying to say across to everybody to avoid the problems and complications. So I'm thinking maybe I shouldn't be a family business advisor, but I should be a family business marketer or something, because it sounds exactly like what we do as family business advisors. Anyway, Travis, tell me a little bit about how you went from what you were doing into marketing.
Sure. Yeah, like you said at the start of the episode, it was third generation, or maybe even more, depending on how you count the generations. But I grew up working with my dad and my grandpa around the farm. We were all right there and working really closely together. And I mean, my earliest memories are sitting in the tractor with dad, doing some of these things. And so I was always really passionate about the ag side. But as I got older, I saw the challenges that ag takes on the human body, and just the mental exhaustion that you go through to do that. And I didn't really think that I wanted to follow down that path. So but I didn't know what I wanted to do when I grew up either. And 30 years later, I still don't. And I think that's partly why you see some of the different career paths I've changed. I've gone from in college, I had a marketing professor that she's like, you love to tell these stories. We need to figure out how to make this part of your career. And so she directed me down that, and I've followed down the banking and the finance, or the legal, and all these different companies, because they're just different stories that need told, and it's fun to learn about them. My mind bounces all over the place anyhow, and so understanding the different stories for a very short, fast amount of time was perfect for me. And then, turning it into the agency side takes all of that background that Ange and I both have, and lets us focus it on specific parts of the industry. She sees the science behind the reasons why a company is wanting to do things, the story behind it, the data that needs to be told. And I can see the farmer's perspective on the ag side, right? Like, I know when Monsanto is coming out and having conversations with the farmers, or when a sales rep is coming out and parking their truck on someone's ranch, I know the reaction that's going to cause to that rancher, to that ag team on the family side. So I think that the ability for us to take those two different approaches to marketing and to the emotions and the senses behind it all pairs really, really well for what we're trying to do.
Well, that's amazing. I love the fact that you went down a different path and then ended up coming together in starting a family business, having come from the farming industry, which is also a family business. So, how does this, coming in as cousins and coming in with, previous history of work and coming together, how does this help you or hinder you professionally when you're learning to collaborate and share stories and communicate?
Yeah, so I think that there are a lot of elements there. And as you had pointed out before, there's always challenges when you're working with a family-owned business, right? But Travis and I feel like, have always been pretty well in tune together with what we see on the marketing side. We see similar challenges, for instance, and just a very specific example, in the world of SEO, there's a lot changing, and it's changing really rapidly. There's also a lot changing with AI. And those are things that we both have some affinity for, some understanding of, so we can share that knowledge together. In fact, it's very helpful to be able to do that, because then I can go to Travis and say, hey, are you seeing what I'm seeing? And vice versa. He can come to me and ask if I'm seeing the same thing. And it's interesting, having worked with related but still different industries, to see some of that overlap, or sometimes at times seeing some differences too. So I think that's helped it make it easier for us, is that we have that unique perspective in our own kind of fields of view, but there's also so much overlap where we can share that knowledge. And I think that really helps us from a business standpoint. When it comes to challenges, I think that some of those challenges are that when it comes to serving certain clients with their different needs, we have a different approach, which isn't actually a bad thing. I think that's actually very good that we have different approaches. Sometimes my approach is going to be better for one client. Travis's approach might be better for a different client, depending on what those goals are, what the approach is, and what they're aiming to do. So I think that there's different benefits, and there's different cons as well. But Travis and I feel like we communicate very well together, and we're able to bring those things out in the open and figure out some way to bridge whatever those gaps may exist, and find enough similarities between the work that we're doing as well and what we're seeing. But yeah, Travis, I'm sure you can share some insight on that too.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, to kind of be humorous about it, it does help that we live in different states. So there's not the, a lot of our communication is very digital and it's back and forth. So I think back onto the farming days, the challenges that Dad and Grandpa would have, the butting of heads. You don't have that quite as much because we're approaching it from a different perspective, like Andrew was saying, and that helps a lot. I think from the fact that we're both really interested in all the same concepts helps us communicate well. From a cons perspective, I think because there is the familiarity, it's easier to maybe say, oh, I'm gonna miss this meeting, or the holding yourself accountable to the other can be a little bit more difficult because they're family versus, in other lives I've had, agency partners where it's like, no, it's a lot more, there's a lot more almost fear of missing something because there's not that closeness that we have. And I think the fact that we do work so well together, it helps kind of balance that out though, because we're not arguing about different perspectives. We're not trying to come with this is going to be the way it is. It has to be my way. Whereas you run into that in some other family businesses that I've watched.
Well, generally, when there's a single founder, that's when most of the issues happen when it's a transition to the next gen because it's only been one person making the decision. So, because there are two of you and you're equal, then what if there's a challenge? Do you have a strategy of like who gets to win this time, or how does it happen when you do have different opinions? Because you're different people, it's going to happen, right? It's not always going to be sunshine and roses.
Yeah, I think the approach that we both have is just to have open communication about things. And luckily for us, we're usually pretty reasonably on the same page. And we're not, neither one of us is really, you know, really very stuck in our ways. We're very flexible with our approach. And I think that serves us really well. But to your point, you're right. There are going to be disagreements. We've had some few, I'd say small disagreements here and there, but usually we just communicate about those things openly. We talk about what are the pros and cons. Both Travis and I are very analytical, so we can easily see, okay, these are the benefits, these are the cons. Oh, okay, that approach does make sense. And when we get those things all out in the open, it's usually easy for us to see that. So I think that certainly helps. But
I agree. I mean, there hasn't been anything that's so, thinking back to some of the other observations I've watched in families going back and forth, we have not run into that, right? And a lot of it is we have our own approach to it. We also have kind of like we're the primary on different clients, and so if I have a strong feeling that this is the way that it needs to be that way, I'm going to listen to the advice that has. But if I'm like set in stone that it has to be that way, unless the data is going to show something different, we'll usually come to an agreement that way, and vice versa. I'm very open to being wrong. So when Ange has a very strong feeling that, hey, this is really how it should be, it's not, I don't have an ego that needs to get in the way. So I think we're fortunate in a way that we don't have those strong personalities that other companies have. Again, like I watched my dad and grandpa, and that's one I kind of leaned back into a lot because they were both very strong personalities and had very strong opinions on how each part of the different farm and ranch would run. And so there was a lot more headbutting, whereas Anja, it's like, yeah, the strategy is where she's going to shine. If she thinks that that's where it's going to need to be, unless I have something to prove it, I'm good with that.
So, have you thought about the next generation? Because this isn't something that you went into right at the get-go. You had other careers and then moved into this. What is your thought about a family business moving forward? And I'm not sure how old your children are, if they're too young, but have you started to talk about the fact that, you have this business and again, it's across states and, you're setting it up for the future. Have you talked about that, the succession plan?
we haven't talked about a succession plan. It's definitely something that is worth thinking about. My kids are little, so our kids are very different ages. Travis has kids that are adults right now, whereas I have very little kids. My oldest is going to be 7 later this summer. So very, very different ages. And I guess the way I feel about it is if my kids at some point were excited about it, I've always loved to fuel their curiosity. I'm a very curious person by my own very nature as well, but I would also never push them to do that. So if they're curious about the work I'm doing, and sometimes they will ask questions and I'll answer them. And if they continue to show that curiosity and want to be involved, I would be more than happy to include them. But that said, we don't have a succession plan. It's not something we've ever really talked about, but yeah, it's something that I think down the road we would consider at some point. I don't know what you think, Travis.
Yeah, and my kids went into different careers. So my daughter's a nurse and my son's in sales. And I don't know that, I mean, I don't think that either of them really are that interested in taking down this, kind of journey. My son has started his own companies, and so he understands what it goes into that on his side. And I don't think that he wants to move into the agency world at this point. I mean, he's 20s, early, mid 20s, so that's not as passionate. And my daughter's very passionate about nursing, so I don't see her interest in that.
Well, that's that bio, right? That's that,
Oh yeah.
the scientific part. So when you look at this, I mean, you can bring it together and say, well, potentially, like, what are the opportunities? But the other thing to consider is that, your family and your partners, and what happens if something happens to either one of you. Because when it's single, you've got one family. But does this mean that if anything happened to Travis, that Angela would now take on the roles and responsibility of the entire business, or does this become part of your estate, Travis, for the next generation? Because it becomes complicated when it's family, right? And there is, adult next generation, or even when there's not. Like, for example, in my family, my husband would not want to take this on, right? But there is an opportunity to, plan your succession, whatever that looks like. So have you thought about that? Because it becomes very interesting when it's a family, as opposed to you'll never have to see this person again, right? Or the family.
Yeah, the one thing that we have talked about is that we agreed, the both of us, that regardless of what happens with the business, it's not going to impact our own personal relationship, So we always hope for the best and hope that nothing happens to either one of us. But to your point, Tammy, things happen. Life has a way of getting in the way sometimes. But yeah, our stance has been that our family life is separate from our business. Yes, we do work together, and there are things that we do well together, and we enjoy working together. But that is not going to impact how we feel about each other as a family. It's not going to change that relationship in any respects. We still have family gatherings and things like that are all really important to us. But in terms of succession planning, yeah, I think that's another conversation for down the road, because frankly, we haven't discussed it yet.
Yeah, and it is important because it is an asset. It is a family, and that's when it becomes a little more complicated, right? Because it does form part of your estate. So even if it's not going to children, to figure out, is it going to either one of you? I think that's important. But I want to talk just a little bit, because we're almost out of time, believe it or not. But I do want to talk about, the marketing, the business that you have, and AgTech and biotech, and, such an interesting space to work on. And, what it is that you think a lot of companies do wrong from a marketing standpoint.
Sure, I can take that one. I mean, I think one of the biggest ones, especially just the way that the world is right now, there's so much opportunity in the AI space, right? From simple management of meetings to sales opportunities to content creation. And maybe it's just because of the contacts I have, but I see a lot of people arguing, well, was this AI generated or was it not? Or what we need to get back to is making sure that we're always just doing really good work. And whether it was through a collaboration with a family member, or it was through a collaboration with an AI, tool, as long as the end result is better work for whether it's your client or your customer or whomever that may be, that's where we really need to focus. It's definitely creating some SEO challenges, right, from the search side, because every day Google is making some alteration to how your company is going to show up, and we have to be really in the 30 years I've been doing this, I don't know that I've seen something quite as dramatic as what's happening right now, as far as like how urgent it is to be, at the very top of some of these overviews. How that happens, that shifts every day, and whether it's biotech and ag, or whether it's technology or finance, we're all struggling to really learn what this is like. And I think it's really cool. I think people just need to get over the um, I don't want to call it a knee-jerk reaction, but don't worry so much about how the information comes about, how it's going to be used. Just make yourself as familiar with these new tools, and use them to make your business better and to make your customers happier with whatever product you're selling.
Great advice. Well, we're out of time, believe it or not. Goes by very quickly. And I'd like to end every podcast with 3 pieces of advice. So since there's 2 of you, now you have to decide who gets the 3rd piece. So I'm going to let you figure that out. This is when it comes down to open communication. So give me 3 pieces of advice that you would give to other family members thinking of starting a business together. What would be your 3 pieces of advice you'd give to other family members? Now, who wants to
I'll,
start?
I'll start with the first one, and then I'll give Travis the second one. And if he wants to do a third one, he can do that one too.
Oh, look, is that an argument? Did I see a head shaking no?
The first thing I would say is and based on our discussion, this is probably going to be no surprise, but communication really is key. And if you're going to be successful, you really need to be able to openly communicate. And every communication style varies for different people, and some people communicate with certain styles, and but what you need to do is you need to make sure that those styles overlap in some way. And sometimes you have to over communicate. I feel like I do that with Travis, and I feel like Travis does that with me too, which is great. I think sometimes you have to over communicate or get to a point where you feel like you're communicating more often than even seems necessary, because then you're doing an adequate job. And I think that challenge only increases when you are working in a digital landscape and you're not in the same place. You have to communicate that much more. So yeah, I'll say communication is key. It is the very first thing.
Good advice.
Yeah, I would add on to that, setting things up really well at the start. When Angie and I started thinking about what we wanted to do, we had several planning sessions ahead of time to make sure that we understood. We have different, family units. We're at different stages in our lives. We have different, approaches to marketing and strategy and all these different pieces, making sure that we understood how it was all going to be structured. And then making like, hey, if we haven't gone into the like estate planning side of it, if something is important enough, how do we handle that? If I get hit by a bus tomorrow, who's going to take over the clients? I think there's, we set some of that up ahead of time. We talked about, like potential pitfalls. If I want to be very active in a certain social cause, or if Ange wants to be, how does that affect what our business is, or how we want to approach that? So that would be the big piece I would advise. And I think that it's applicable across all, whether you're starting with your best friend, your unknown, or a family member. But I think when it comes to the family piece, because of the dynamics, it's so important. You don't want to ruin your family because of a business.
Great advice. And number 3.
The third one I think pulls in from what Travis was saying. So I'll just lead into that. But I think setting boundaries is important, or saying, hey, this is a no for me, or that's going to be a yes for me, or this is where I consider it kind of gray area. We did have those conversations ahead of time. And I think that was really helpful for us to understand, what are values? Where did they overlap? What for us are hard no's? What are some clients, for instance, that we definitely wouldn't want to work with because our values aren't in alignment? So setting those boundaries. So not only on the client piece and the business piece, but also setting that boundary for our family life and saying, hey, this is business, this is family. These things, while yes, we are family and we work in business together, we're not going to let that impact our family lives. So I think setting boundaries is really important too, and being open about those and what those are for you and for the other person or any other people that are involved.
I love that because you mentioned values, and I think values are very, very important for any business, and particularly family businesses if you want to transition and build a culture and everything around it. And not too many people talk about that. And I think the boundaries really comes around the values. And I think that every family business has values. They just haven't defined them because we have our own values and we need to bring that forward. So I love the fact that you mentioned that, Angela. Thank you very much. Anyway, it was a real pleasure to have you on the podcast today. I hope you found it fun and not
Definitely.
intimidating at all. So, again, thank you very much. And if they wanted to reach out to you to find a little bit more about what you do, where could they find you?
The best place to find us is right on our website. It's tiptonfranklin.com, and we have contact pages all throughout the website. We also have a really handy free e-guide, an ebook that you can download right on the website. So that's a great place to get started. We also have a newsletter, so feel free to sign up for that as well. But yeah, the best place to start is on our website.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having us,
Thank you.
Tammy.
If you liked this episode, subscribe to the Business of Family podcast on your favorite listening platform. You can also find Blue Roots on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. On the next show, I'll be back with another amazing guest who will inspire you with their family business insights. Until then, take care and keep it in the family. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal, tax, investment, or insurance advice. Before acting on any advice, please contact your personal or company advisors.